Welcome, one and all, to episode number 2 of the American Hotspur podcast. I hope you all are doing very, very well. In today's episode, we are going to be going over the biggest problems that every Premier League club needs to fix heading into this transfer window. Before we get started, please do be sure to leave a like and subscribe on YouTube and follow and give it 5 stars on Spotify. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Gehi seems like just the perfect signing for them. He almost cost them the championship title on numerous occasions last season. If results start to not go their way, I wouldn't be surprised if we get 10 games in, if they're towards the bottom of the Premier League, that maybe Daniel Farke is given the chop. On paper, their squad really has no weaknesses. They need to improve in basically every area of the pitch. Starting off, AFC Bournemouth will be the first club that we are discussing. Obviously, they had the massive departures of Dean Howson and Milos Kerkez. They've already begun the process of replacing Kerkez with Tufair, who I think is going to be a fantastic signing. I think around 13 million euros. Couldn't ask for much better in terms of almost a like-for-like replacement. Somebody who's going to get up and down that left flank the way that Andoni Iraola is going to want his fullbacks to do. But I still think on the other side at right back, they could do for somebody a bit higher quality than Adam Smith, who has been a very good servant. They have Araujo, who is a very good right back as well, but hasn't necessarily cut it at Premier League level yet, and to me looks more like a depth option than anything. So their main priorities should be goalkeeper and defensive depth, particularly in the right back and center back categories. I think Senesi will do a fine job in sort of filling in for Dean Howson, but they definitely need more depth in that area. We saw towards the back half of last season how injuries began to hamper them quite a bit, and I think the defensive department was the biggest area of concern when it came down to it at the end of the season. And then in terms of a goalkeeper, Kepa has obviously signed for Arsenal, will not be making his loan move permanent. Neto went out on loan to Arsenal last season. He seems like he's going to be a backup option rather than a starter, so it's certainly time for them to look into filling in that role and getting a starting goalkeeper one of their main priorities. As I said, right back I think should be a big priority, but if you go into the Premier League season with Adam Smith and Araujo as your options, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world, but center back is an area where they could use a lot more depth with the departure of Howson. Senesi and Zabarnyi will be a great center back pairing still. Senesi was the starter at the beginning of the season before Howson kind of came into that really good run of form. But they don't really have much depth outside of the pair of them, and Zabarnyi is still heavily linked with a move to PSG, and if that move does get over the line, they will be really, really stretched for options at the back, so it definitely could be time for them to start looking into maybe getting somebody who can either replace Zabarnyi or Senesi, or somebody who can just come in and give them a lot of minutes off the bench. The intensity of Iraola's style means that they always need to have depth in basically every area of the pitch, and I think in attack and midfield as well, they do have very good options for depth, but defense is where they're quite a bit lighter than other areas. And as I said, goalkeeper needs to be a main priority, with Kepa not rejoining Bournemouth and instead joining Arsenal on a permanent to be their backup goalkeeper. For Arsenal, we move on to them. Of course, as we mentioned, they made the signing of Kepa Arrizabalaga, who is, of course, only going to be a backup to David Raya. Their main areas of concern for me this window are going to be attacking midfield and attacking depth overall. As I'm recording this, it seems like the Gyökeres deal is going to get over the line. I actually made a video about that, and since I've made that video, it seems as though Sporting have come down on their original asking price for Gyökeres, and that deal looks like it will be done at some point in the near future here. So they still, to me, don't really have a ton of depth options in attack. Leandro Trossard is a very, very good option who can fill in just about anywhere in the attacking line, but he's seemingly having more injury problems as the years go on. Ethan Nwaneri is a very good option on the right as well. But I still think in terms of a striker, even Gyökeres isn't enough for me. He will, of course, command that starting role, but you do need somebody for depth purposes still. Gabriel Jesus does not seem like he can stay fit at this point. Kai Havertz is more of somebody that you can kind of throw in various areas depending on the need. But I think the real area of depth concern for them is going to be that attacking midfield department. Fabio Vieira does not seem like he's going to work out as the backup for Martin Odegaard. Wanyeri seems like he's better on the wing than he is in that attacking midfield role, and they really, really struggled for creativity when Odegaard was either out with injury or just out of form. You could say that the two are related to one another, but it still seems like they need somebody who can challenge him in that position. They've done really well signing Martin Zubimendi to fill in for that defensive midfield role. I think that's a perfect signing in that area. And they've also signed Christian Norgard, who, as far as a backup defensive midfielder, it really doesn't get much better than that. Their overall midfield options are going to be incredible between Merino, Rice. I rolled my R on Declan Rice. Merino, Rice, Martin Zubimendi, Martin Odegaard, Christian Norgard. They do have a ton of depth in that area, but the big area where they are lacking in depth is that attacking midfield role. And again, they still seem like they need somebody who can fill in across the forward line. That's why they signed Raheem Sterling last season. So somebody who is of a similar profile to Raheem Sterling, who can fill in pretty much anywhere on the forward line but gives you a lot more output than Raheem Sterling was able to give them last season, is something that they're definitely going to need. Again, you saw with the injury issues how they sort of started to taper off. They were a little bit underwhelming compared to what the expectations were. They didn't really give Liverpool much of a challenge for the Premier League title. There are questions about whether that was Arteta's occasional pragmatism, where they weren't really taking it to teams when perhaps they should have been, but there could also be an argument in there for the fact that the lack of attacking depth was the reason that they weren't able to remain that sort of attacking possession force that they were at times this season before last. So attacking midfield / overall attacking depth are the biggest problems that Arsenal need to solve in this transfer window. Aston Villa. This is a really complicated one because there are certainly a lot of areas in which they will need to improve, especially in terms of depth. Emiliano Martinez looks like he could be on his way out, and there are a couple of other rumored departures such as Ollie Watkins. So there are certainly areas where they need to improve depth-wise, and that's why they made so many signings in January. That's why they did the loans for Marco Asensio and for Marcus Rashford. But in doing so, they gave themselves a big issue, and that is the fact that they spend more of their profit on player wages than any other Premier League club. They were actually recently fined by UEFA for breaching financial rules regarding earnings and squad cost. So it certainly looks like they need to start trimming down wages and getting in better favor with PSR going forward as their main priority in this transfer window before they can really think about adding any of that squad depth. Of course, they are in the Europa League this season, which is Unai Emery's favorite competition. Nobody seems to be better at winning that competition than Unai Emery, and in fact, I think nobody has won it more than Unai Emery between his triumph at Villarreal and at Sevilla. So like I said, there are a lot of areas in which they could improve, not just in terms of depth, but in terms of the starting 11. But it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to do that until they start trimming off some of the fat in the squad and getting that wage bill down. So that needs to be the main priority this summer, is finding creative ways to get in the good graces of PSR and then start to build their squad going forward. Next up, we have Brentford, and the biggest thing for them this transfer window is going to be replacing star departures. We've already seen how they replaced Mark Flecken with Kelleher. I think that was a fantastic signing, and overall, I think he's going to be a really, really good starting goalkeeper for them. I'm glad that he's going to get his chance to start, because when Alisson was out injured last season, he looked fantastic. He was looking like the best backup goalkeeper in the Premier League, so I think that was a pretty low-risk signing, all things considered, especially for the price that they got him at. But it looks like Norgard's going to be leaving. The rumors of him going to Arsenal are ramping up. I think it's only a formality at this point of getting the final details down on that signing. So he looks like he's going to be on his way out. There's still the rumors surrounding Mbeumo. He looks almost certain to leave with 2 years left on his contract. It almost seems like they have to sell him this summer. Of course, Thomas Frank departing for Tottenham. There's still a ton of rumors surrounding Nathan Collins and Johan Vissa. So the biggest thing for them is making sure that they replace those star names with players who are ready to step up to that Premier League level. I think that they overall have a really talented squad, even with those players departing. And you don't necessarily have to get players in those positions who are like for like as high quality, because Norgard and Mbeumo were their most important players. Basically, ever since coming up, you had the likes of obviously Ivan Toney and David Rea, but since the departures of those two players, those have been the most two important figures, Norgard and Mbeumo we're talking about. So it's going to be a big challenge for them. And there is, of course, the big question for them of whether or not their squad is really ready to stay up in the Premier League without Thomas Frank. There's a discussion to be had about whether Thomas Frank was making some of those players perform to a much higher level than is actually their out-and-out quality. You had players like Keane Lewis Potter filling in as a left back. And there's some question marks around certain players in that squad, especially if the likes of Mbeumo, Vissa, and Norgard are to depart this summer. So really for them, it's going to be just proving that they can stay in the Premier League and making some clever signings to replace those departures, which they've been very good at to this point, but this would be the biggest challenge that they face thus far, especially with the departure of Thomas Frank. For Brighton, they're the next club that we have to discuss here, and their biggest problem going into the season will just be settling on a consistent starting 11. Even with the departure of João Pedro and the potential departure of Kaoru Mitoma, I still think that they have a squad that is capable of challenging for Europe, even if they don't out and out replace those two players. And I don't think that they necessarily need to. They have one of the thickest squads in the division, and in fact, last season they were second for players used across the entirety of the season. So it's very clear that, especially last season, Fabian Hürzeler was struggling to pick out a consistent starting 11. There were a lot of fluctuations in the fullback area. There were tons of switches made in the midfield and in attack as well. So it seems to me like if they really want to make a push for Europe next season, the biggest thing for them is going to be settling on a consistent starting 11. It's okay to have rotation. It's okay to make tactical tweaks, but you're never going to stay consistently above water in terms of that European race if you don't know who your best players are week in and week out, and if you're constantly chopping and changing. It's just not an environment that's conducive to players being able to hit the ground running and stay consistent and stay consistently confident, especially when you have such a young squad, when you have so many players who are coming in under the age of 21 and some players that are even teenagers that are trying to make a name for themselves in this squad. So settling on a starting 11 early on in the season that is going to be not unchanging, but more consistently used, I think is going to be the biggest thing for Brighton. Because like I said, they already have a squad that is European quality, even without João Pedro and potentially Kaoru Mitoma. It's just about settling on the 11 and the tactical identity that will push them over the line. Next up, we have the first of the newly promoted clubs, and that is Burnley. There's a lot of issues to address in this squad, and for any of the newly promoted clubs coming up over the last few seasons and going forward, it's going to be a massive, massive challenge. But to keep it simple, I think the biggest thing for them is consistent goal scoring and creative output. Last season in the championship, of course, they were automatically promoted. I think they were, level on points with Leeds, but finished second due to goal difference. Their defensive identity was what really got them over the line. And even with the departure of CJ Egan-Riley, I still think there's a ton of quality in that defensive line. So I don't know that that necessarily needs to be their biggest priority, especially with Kyle Walker coming through the door. I think that's a fantastic signing with his flexibility in playing at either right back or at center back. But last season in the championship, Josh Brownhill was their leading scorer. And after him, the next closest was Zion Fleming with, I believe, 12 goals. And a midfielder like Josh Brownhill, I don't know if you're going to be able to get that goal-scoring output from him in the Premier League. I think Brownhill, let me get one thing clear, is a fantastic player. I think he's been underrated for some time now, and I'm excited to see what he can do with another shot in the Premier League. But you're not going to get anywhere if he is going to be your leading scorer in the Premier League as well. They definitely need a talisman type striker or winger. And looking at their squad, I struggle to see where it is currently within the squad. I don't know that any of their players are going to step up and provide that consistent goal scoring output. And it doesn't really matter how good you are defensively if you can't put the ball in the back of the net consistently. And they didn't really have much creativity last season either. Jadon Anthony was their leading assist maker with 7 assists. Josh Brownhill was second at 6 assists. And although I think those are two very good players, I don't think that they are the level of player who will step up into the Premier League and provide that, that just direct, being able to create chances out of nothing type of player that they're going to need, especially with so many games where it'll come down to the wire and they just need that little quality, that little moment to get them over the line against some of the bigger clubs, and be the difference potentially between 1 point and 3 points in some game, or no points and 1 point in some games, because you're not going to be expected to be the better team in the majority of games as a promoted club. It's just about, can you grind those results out? You're probably going to be well beaten and outplayed, I should say, in the majority of your games coming up, especially for a team that is known for being, very, very defensive. They were high for possession in the championship last season, but it really was their defensive quality that stuck out. And I would expect this season that Scott Parker is going to have them set up quite defensively. So having somebody who is a natural finisher in front of goal, and be a natural creator who can create something out of nothing. They do have Tresor coming back from loan. There's rumors that he may stay at the club this season, but he's not proven in the Premier League, although he looked fantastic in his loan spells and in the Belgian league. There still is no guarantees that he's going to be able to provide that output in the Premier League, so they definitely need to get some attacking quality in, who can provide that quality in the final third, whether that be creating chances or finishing them. Next up, we have Chelsea, who've already been very active in the transfer window, as we've seen. But for me, the biggest areas of concern that they need to identify in this transfer window going forward are going to be goalkeeper, and something that won't necessarily be addressed in the transfer window but will be addressed throughout the season is forwards commanding a role in this side. So starting off with the goalkeeper department, Robert Sanchez, it's very clear that he is just not of the level to be a starting Premier League goalkeeper, or at least I should say for a Premier League team that is looking to qualify for the Champions League and potentially make a title push in the near future. I thought it was really strange for them to give up on Petrovic so easy, considering he was one of the best goalkeepers in Europe last season, not just for his shot-stopping quality, where he was top 5 in the world, in Europe for post-shot expected goals, but his ability with the ball at his feet was genuinely amazing as well. So the fact that they're looking to loan him out or potentially sell him when he's probably able to come in and be the goalkeeper that you're looking for the future and for the now, really strange to me. But if you're going to be getting rid of him, there definitely needs to be somebody coming in that department. They signed Penders from, I think it was Club Brugge? No, sorry, it was Genk in the Belgian league. I'm so sorry. He is one for the future, of course. Jorgensen doesn't look like he is up to the level just yet. Maybe somebody in the future who could command that starting role. And we've already addressed Sanchez, who I just don't think is good enough. So getting somebody in who can command the starting goalkeeper role is a must for them this season if they want to progress and qualify for the Champions League and maybe even be an outside shout for challenging for the Premier League. And then in terms of that forward line, it was very clear that none of their wingers specifically really made a name for themselves. They've already addressed the striker role, signing Liam Delap and Joao Pedro, who I think will be interchangeable depending on the tactical situation. If you want to go more direct, I think that Joao Pedro is your guy with his ability to drop deep and receive the ball and create chances on the counter. When they're playing their more patient possession buildup, I think Liam Delap will be the player who can just kind of sit on the shoulder of the defenders and really wait for his chances and be that poacher in the penalty box. So I think they've done really well to address that role, and it's just a matter of letting those players build that confidence in the striker role. But their wingers, none of them really commanded that starting role last season. You think of Pedro Neto and Nani Madueke, who there's rumors that he may even be leaving in this transfer window. It's very clear that Maresca is not confident in either of those players, although Madueke, you would argue, has done more to be in Maresca's good graces. He was a pretty consistent mainstay, but the fact that there's so many rumors surrounding him and the fact that it seems like Chelsea are happy to let him go suggests to me that there's not much confidence in the wingers that are currently in the squad. So they already have the depth. They already have the key players in midfield. You could say that maybe they could use another starting quality defender. I wouldn't be mad at that, a starting quality center back, that is. But I do think that they're pretty settled in that role still. It's just about some of those players progressing, such as Levi Colwill, Trevor Chalobah. So I think that the main area that they need to address is just really those forwards commanding that starting role. And whether that means signing another winger in this transfer window, I'm not entirely sure. But it would be ideal for them to have settled starters on the wing when you've got Cole Palmer, when you've got Liam Delap and Joao Pedro, who are very clearly going to command the roles in the striker and attacking midfield department. Next up, we have Crystal Palace. They've already made a marquee signing in Diamond, which I can't even believe that they've signed him. He is a player that I thought would be able to come in and start at a club like Chelsea or Manchester United, but Crystal Palace got that deal over the line. So I think they've already done well to address one of the areas that we're going to talk about. But overall, I think they need to address wing-back and center-back depth. I think they have the starting 11 to potentially push for a European place, not just through getting that cup run that they did last season, but maybe finishing in a top 7 place, which should be enough to get Conference League. Their starting 11, especially if Mark Gahey and Ebere Eze do end up staying this transfer window, they have the quality to make a push for a European place. But with them qualifying for the Europa League definitively now, there are certainly questions to be asked about their depth. I think their midfield depth is very, 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 very solid. You could say that maybe they could be looking for another attacking midfielder to fill in alongside either Eze or Sarr when one or the other needs to rotate in or out of the squad. You could say that maybe they're already looking to replace Eddie Nketiah, because he didn't really hit the ground running as that backup striker for Mateta, who ended up commanding the starting role. But really, I think the most obvious area for improvement in terms of depth is the wing-back positions. Nathaniel Klein is really the only backup wing-back that they have, and even he was looking more like an outside center back at times last season. That seemed to be his more favorable role as far as Oliver Glasner's tactics were concerned. So having somebody who can come in and fill in for Daniel Munoz and Tyreek Mitchell is going to be key for them, especially with how much running is required from those players in that position. And I think even you could maybe look at a left back who is more attack-minded than Tyreek Mitchell, just to give you a different tactical element. Somebody who in games where you should be commanding the game more can come in and really bomb up and down the pitch and be more creative in the final third on the left flank. I think Munoz is so well-rounded in that position. I think he's perfect in terms of that Oliver Glasner wingback getting up and down the right-hand flank. So I don't think there's much need to look for somebody to replace him, but for somebody to fill in for him when they start to get more tired as the competition, as the number of games start to build on. And then in terms of center back depth, apart from them signing Diamond, it's still very clear that they could use at least one more center back, preferably a left-footed one, because outside of the new signing Diamond, really only Nathaniel Klein is the backup center back. So there is definitely an argument to be made that they could use another center back and preferably a left-footed one. Even if Gahey is to stay, I think that should be a position that they address. Again, with how many competitions and how many games they're going to be playing in, that is going to be a very, very key role, especially with somebody like Chris Richards having that injury history. I think Lacroix has a decent injury track record as well. They got a little bit lucky last season with most of their primary players staying fit, but you can't count on that with more and more games being added to the schedule. Next up, we have Everton. Really pushed on towards the end of last season, but there are very clearly some areas that they need to identify. And for me, just as a general note, attacking depth, particularly a starting striker, but overall depth in the attacking areas, and then a starting right back. Everton fans, you'll have to let me know on this one because O'Brien was the starting right back and did a really good job in that role. But it feels like to me, if David Moyes' history is to repeat itself, he will eventually look for a right back who is more of like a wing back and then maybe revert to a back three or just have somebody in there who gives him the option to be a bit more forward thinking on the counterattack. Because again, O'Brien did really, really well filling in on that role. He was defensively incredible, but it does seem like they could use somebody in that role who is a bit more forward-thinking and is going to get up and down the pitch in those counterattacking scenarios, especially with the departure of Ashley Young. Seamus Coleman and Nathan Patterson are their only recognized right backs at the moment, and Seamus Coleman is 100 years old. Nathan Patterson only played 10 games in the Premier League last season. Doesn't really seem like he's in the plans for the future, which is unfortunate because I used to sign him in career mode quite often. But they could use somebody to start and command that role in the right back slot. In terms of overall attacking depth, you have Alcaraz, McNeil, and Njai. I think that's a really, really good starting forward line behind the striker. But after that, they don't really have anybody to fill in when those players are injured or when those players are unfit. So getting somebody who is along the lines of a McNeil, of an Alcaraz, or of an Njai, these players are all flexible across the forward line. Getting another player or two in there who can do the same thing where they can fill in on the right, in the center, on the left, and potentially in at striker as well. That would do them a lot of good. And of course, getting a starting striker needs to be a priority this summer. I know Beto really had that purple patch and helped them get more of that goal scoring output, but it was very clear at times that they could use a bit more quality than that in the final third. So getting somebody who is really that box presence, somebody who is commanding in the air, just somebody who will be the mainstay starter, no questions asked in the starting striker role, needs to be a priority for them this summer. For Fulham, this one was one of the most difficult ones because I really, really like the squad that Fulham have overall. But for me, the main areas of concern are striker, and controversially, I think goalkeeper is one that they need to address this summer as well. Starting off with the striker, I love Raul Jimenez's resurgence. He just scored against the United States in the Gold Cup final. He's had a fantastic season both at international and club level, really starting to look like himself again. But he is 34 years old now. And Muniz, although I really like him as a depth option, I think it's very clear that he will never be a starting quality striker in the Premier League. He's somebody you'd rather have coming off the bench and filling in rotation when tired legs start to set in. So I think it may be time for them to finally splash the cash on a starting level striker, somebody who will be that, potentially 15 goals a season that they've been missing since the departure of Mitrovic. Again, I really like the resurgence that Jimenez has had, but at 34 years old, there's no guarantee that he can sustain that, and he still does have occasional injury concerns that need to be addressed. So that would be an area that I would look to pursue for them this summer. I think midfield depth, they have so many players who are versatile across the midfield, like people like Alex Iwobi who can fill in on the right, in the center, on the left. Somebody like Andres Pereira who can play pretty much anywhere in midfield. Emil Smith-Rowe who can play on the left and in the center. Sander Berg who can play as a defensive midfielder or a more forward-minded box-to-box midfielder. I think Sasha Lukic started to look really good towards the end of last season. They have decent depth in defense as well. So again, for me, it's not a question of any of those positions. It's really the striker role. But I think goalkeeper is one that they may need to address this summer. People think of Leno at Fulham and they think of somebody who has been incredibly reliable, and I would agree with that overall. When he came in from Arsenal when they were first promoted back to the Premier League, he was incredible. He kept them in so many games. But last season, he was pretty shaky in goal. I think he underperformed his post-shot expected goals by like 5 or 6. It was a really bad number. And I know that doesn't tell the full story. There were some own goals in there, but he did look a little bit shaky. And especially when it seems like Marco Silva is trying to be a bit more progressive in his tactics. You'd prefer somebody who's maybe a little bit better at that short passing game. So getting a goalkeeper in who is a bit younger, maybe won't be the starter right away, but can challenge Leno for that starting role, and maybe get the best out of him by providing him some sort of competition. I think this would be a good opportunity to do it this summer before Leno starts to really decline and you start to be a little bit more panicked in what you're going to do in terms of filling in that role. And that doesn't even get into the fact that they don't even really have a backup goalkeeper at this point. So I would expect them to sign some form of a goalkeeper this summer. Next up, we have another one of the newly promoted teams, that is Leeds United. Leeds United, another team who have already done some fantastic business this summer with the signings of Bornau and Biol. It looks like Ramsdale might be through the door, but the mention of Ramsdale brings up an important point for this talk in this podcast episode, and that is goalkeeper. That needs to be, I think, the main priority for them this summer. I also have in here left back because Junior Firpo has left on a contract exit, and then striker as well, which I'll get into in a little bit, but it looks like they're already addressing that. Meslier, he's clearly not a Premier League level goalkeeper. Barely looked like he was ready to be a top-level goalkeeper in the championship. He almost cost them the championship title on numerous occasions last season. I think back to that blunder that he had against Sunderland on that free kick, and that's just one example. That's like the most high-profile example. But there were many times where, like in certain games where they looked like they had the clean sheet in the bag, and then he lets in a very savable shot that really just doesn't fill you with confidence, Meslier. And he hasn't done for quite some time. Their last season in the Premier League, I think this was an area of concern for them. And they didn't address it this season, which was fine. But they're really heavily pursuing Ramsdale. And a report that I read recently suggests that they're in pole position to make that signing happen, which I think would be perfect for them. I think Ramsdale could push for a move to one of those clubs who are challenging for a European place. So the fact that it looks like Leeds will get this deal over the line is just incredible. And if they could do that one, there's no question about it for me that they should make it happen. He would be a dream signing for them, and maybe could be the difference between them staying up and going down next season. We've talked about left back as well. It looks like they're targeting Gudmundsson, the Swedish left back from Lille. Haven't watched a ton of him, but from what I've seen, he does look really, really good and would be an immediate upgrade on Junior Firpo, who does all of the same things that Firpo does, just at a higher level. Again, it looks like Leeds have been really and are going to continue to be really ambitious in this transfer window, signing players who are of a European level. The aforementioned Biol and Bornau, those are some really ambitious signings who I think could take them to that next level in terms of staying in the Premier League. They also look like they're going to be signing Callum Wilson. The contract talks between him and Newcastle seem to have come to a complete stopping point. I think a recent report said that he has already basically got a foot out the door at this point. So if they could make that deal happen, somebody who, when he is fit, there's no question about it, he is a goal scorer in the Premier League. For him, it's never been a question of can he do it in the Premier League. It's just been a question of can he stay fit. So somebody like him who will be that consistent goal scoring output in the Premier League, but will also likely stay with you if you go down, and is like just probably one of the best strikers of this generation in the championship. You can't do much better than that if you're Leeds United. They obviously signed Lucas Nemecha, like the most underwhelming signing you could have possibly made, but it's clearly just like a third option behind Pirlo and potentially Wilson now coming in as well. But arguably the biggest issue for Leeds United is Daniel Farke. There's been so many rumors about them potentially sacking him even before the season has started. So that could be another area of concern for them. Is he going to stay? Are they going to be confident in him going forward? They may be a little bit trigger happy. If results start to not go their way, I wouldn't be surprised if we get 10 games in, if they're towards the bottom of the Premier League, that maybe Daniel Farke is given the chop. So watch out for that one. But overall, their business has been amazing, and I like the signings that they're targeting. It seems like they're already looking to address those potential areas of concern. Next up, we have Liverpool. The only concern for them is a potential title hangover. On paper, their squad really has no weaknesses. They have ideal depth in pretty much every single position. They have the players to be able to go to multiple tactical tweaks and to make their tactics look completely different depending on the opposition that they're facing. The signings that they've made this summer have been super, super ambitious. I've been a fan of every single one of them. And again, on paper, they have probably the best squad in the Premier League if not by quite a wide margin. So the only potential problems for them this season will be that title hangover and maybe one of Arsenal or City really hitting their stride and just surpassing them on sheer quality and having, that Pep Guardiola resurgence, or Arteta finally getting them over the line in the case of Arsenal. Next up, we have the aforementioned Manchester City. They've already, I think, done the majority of the business that they're going to do in this summer with Reinders, Cherki, Ait Nouri, and then the signings that they made in January as well. They've got a really well-rounded squad, and it seems like they have really good depth in every single position. It does look like Pep wants to be able to tweak his tactics depending on the opposition, which was something that he didn't get to do very much of with the injury problems and the lack of depth and sort of the aging squad that they had last season. For me, their biggest problem is going to be Liverpool or Arsenal. Simply put, it seems like they've done really well to address the previous problems that they had last season. So the problem for them may be just getting off to a slow start, and then Arsenal and or Liverpool just kind of lapping them a little bit and getting off the blocks a bit quicker than them and creating a deficit that may not be able to be overcome in terms of the points tally. So it's hard to identify an area where they need to improve in the transfer window with how much business they did basically as soon as the summer started with the Club World Cup transfer window. You could say maybe they need to sign somebody at right back, but the way that Pep Guardiola seems to want to set up this season, it doesn't seem like that's going to be of massive concern. And as I said, it seems like they've already addressed the areas of concern in the squad. And it's just going to be a matter of having this summer for them to get into Pep's system and really see how everything fits. And again, the biggest problem for them may be just that it may take time for those signings to really hit the ground running and get used to the Pep Guardiola tactical dynamic. And that may give an opportunity for Liverpool or Arsenal to hit the blocks running and just get ahead of them and have too big of a points gap for them to overcome later on in the season. Next up, we have the team that probably has the most problems to address in this transfer window. Nobody's surprised by this. It is Manchester United. The positions or the areas that I have listed here are goalkeeper, center back, midfield, striker, wing back, and clearing out the deadwood, getting off of some of those absurdly high contracts. They need to improve in basically every area of the pitch, especially in terms of depth in certain areas. Cunha was a very good start. I don't think they could have profiled that position much better in terms of that left-sided attacking midfielder behind the striker. That's the role that he played at Wolves, and I think he's going to fit in like a glove in Ruben Amorim's system in terms of his ability to have that positional flexibility, whether that be drifting out wide, whether that be dropping a bit deeper, just finding solutions in that kind of left half space, floating around the pitch, and having the intensity without the ball to fit into the Ruben Amorim pressing dynamic that we saw at Sporting that made them so successful. 10 out of 10 signing for me, and especially for the price that they ended up paying for him. But I still think they need another creative midfielder / wide 10. Obviously, they've been looking at Brian Mbeumo in that position, or Mbeumo rather, in that position. You could say maybe they would put Bruno Fernandes in that position and look to sign somebody to fill in the double pivot. I still think they need at least one player in defensive midfield, if not multiple players in that position. Amad Diallo could potentially be the player who fills in that wide creative right role, but it seems like based on the rumors and based on how Amorim is looking to set up, that Diallo may end up being a wingback. Not entirely sure how I feel about that, especially from a defensive standpoint, but that seems to be the direction that they're heading in. So with that in mind, a right-sided attacking midfielder, another player to play in that double pivot, even if Bruno Fernandes is going to be playing in that double pivot for the long-term future. You certainly need somebody who is more defensive-minded. Whether Ugarte will eventually kick on and command that role remains to be seen. Even though Casemiro did kick on at the end of the season, it's very clear that you're not going to be able to rely on that long-term. And again, even if they don't end up moving, or if they do end up moving Fernandes into that double pivot role for the foreseeable future, as they were towards the end of the season, I still think that a depth option in that position, even somebody potentially to start next to Bruno Fernandes, should be a very big priority, especially with the way that they look to play. Having somebody who can sweep up in midfield and be positionally sound and just know where to position himself in order to prevent counterattacks and to be a little bit more adventurous going forward. It's a huge priority in that system. In terms of a goalkeeper, Onana, they've tried to stick it out with him and make it work. It's just very clear to everybody who has been watching that it's not going to work out. So somebody who is a bit more confident, particularly with the ball at their feet, it's very clearly a priority for them. No sense in wasting this opportunity to get a replacement over the line, because it could be a position where if you don't replace them soon, or Onana that is, if you don't replace him soon, you could be really struggling to find that replacement, and you could end up very much regretting it as the season goes on. A number 9 is very clearly another position that they need to address. Rasmus Højlund really not working out. They could definitely use somebody who is more positionally flexible, somebody who is more confident with the ball at his feet, and somebody the Amorim tactics seem to heavily involve crosses, whether that be from the edge of the box or from wide areas. So getting in somebody who is confident attacking those crosses, potentially getting on the rebounds as well, willing to play on the shoulder of the last defender, really going to be a priority, because all of this may be for nothing if you don't have a striker who can put the ball in the back of the net. Because even when United looked more confident in Amorim's system last season, the fact that they didn't have a consistent goal-scoring threat really hampered them, and it made it really hard for them to progress those Amorim tactics. So that's another position that really needs to be identified. And then in terms of a wing back, I think that's another position that you could argue, whether that be a depth signing or whether that be somebody who commands that starting role. Dorgu didn't really make the left-sided wing back his own last season. 0 goals and assists in the Premier League. Didn't look very convincing. I'm sure he's somebody who will eventually come good for United, but it's very clear that he's not of the level to start week in and week out in that position. They were rumored to be in for Alvaro Carreras of Benfica. So if you can get him over the line, I think that is an ideal tactical fit for them. But that's clearly, again, for me, a position that they need to identify. And potentially both wing-back roles are an area where they need to look into improving upon. Next up, we have Newcastle United. Obviously, they will be adding the Champions League to their plethora of competitions and of games that they will be playing next season. So depth is obviously something that we will talk about here. But the main positions that they need to identify for me are goalkeeper, center back, midfield potentially, and a backup striker as well. They've been rumored to be in for James Trafford. It would be a very good signing if they could get it over the line. Somebody who looks like he's ready to start, but in a worst-case scenario, he's young enough to where if Pope ends up usurping him for the time being, he could improve and eventually take over that starting role if he's not ready for it right this moment. Pope and Dubravka getting on an age now. Neither of them looked at their best last season. Dubravka now 36, Pope now 33. Definitely need to get a younger option in there now, whether that's this summer or whether that's next summer when potentially Trafford will be a bit cheaper if Burnley end up going down, or even looking somewhere besides James Trafford. Getting a goalkeeper in, I would say it has to be this summer, but I don't think it's the end of the world if you have to wait until next summer. I think Pope and Dubravka are good enough to get you over the line for the next season, but it would be ideal for them to sign somebody in that role this summer coming up, or starting now. I really like Fabian Schär and Sven Botman as a center back pairing, and when you add Dan Burn to that when they go to a back five, it's a very strong back line that they have, but Sven Botman has severe injury concerns. Fabian Schär is now, I believe, 35 or 36 years old. Maybe I'm aging him a little bit there, but they definitely need to get somebody in who can either provide competition in the center back role or who can command the starting role. Guéhi seems like just the perfect signing for them with his ability to play in a back five. I think he'd do well in a back four as well, and he's shown that he can do that for England at times. So if the Guéhi deal is on, definitely make that happen. And it would solve so many problems for them going forward. You would have your center back for the future, somebody who could stay there for 5, 6, 7 years and take you over the line in terms of Eddie Howe's tactical flexibility and in terms of just proving the way that they currently play. In the midfield, again, they have pretty good quality in terms of depth in the midfield, but I do think that there's an opportunity to sign somebody who is more creative-minded. Jacob Murphy, his creative sort of improvement last season, really helped get Newcastle over the line in terms of getting them into the Champions League last season. But apart from him, their next closest in terms of assists was Bruno Guimaraes, who is a very, very good player, but I don't think you want him having that much responsibility in terms of creating chances. He's an incredible box-to-box player, but again, I think he is best when he has somebody in front of him who provides more of that creative responsibility. So getting a creative midfielder in there, somebody who can just change the dynamic of that midfield a bit, maybe somebody who can fill in on the right. I'm thinking of like somebody like Harvey Elliott, who is an attacking midfielder who can play out on the right. I think somebody like that would give a lot of tactical flexibility, especially when they go to a back five, somebody who is able to be either a wide player or more of an inside forward / attacking midfielder at times. I think that would open Newcastle up to just being, like I said, more flexible and to maybe taking them to that next level tactically, being able to command games a bit more. Because where they struggled at times, not just this past season and in seasons before that, was just not having enough creativity and enough just somebody who can command the game when they're playing against teams who are going to be a bit more defensive and when they should be commanding the game. They seem to almost be better in games where teams are going to be on the front foot against them and they can respond on the counterattack. They improved a lot this season and in terms of being able to control the game, but I still think, again, somebody who is more of a creative force could make them go to that next level and maybe potentially be an outside shout for a title push in the Premier League. And lastly, we have the backup striker role. Wilson's departure looks imminent, and even if he doesn't depart, his injury history suggests that they should get somebody in who can be a more reliable backup to Isak and potentially somebody who can fill in out wide. That would really give them that would make them more confident in terms of not having to make that many signings in this window, getting somebody who can fill in as striker, but potentially fill in out wide as well as Alexander Isak can do. Next up on the list, we have Nottingham Forest. One of the surprise packages of last season, of course, tapered off towards the end of last season. So the reason for that to me seems very clear. You could say that it was Nuno Espirito Santo's inability to have sort of a tactical plan B. I think there's really something to be said about that. They definitely were figured out towards the end of the season. And in terms of like expected goals, in terms of shot numbers, they were outdone in almost every single game they played, which isn't sustainable. It was very clear based on the numbers that eventually they were going to start to taper off, and they did towards the end of last season. Weren't able to get over the line when you talk about getting into the Champions League places, left it on the final day in that loss to Chelsea. I think maybe you could say that the tactics would have worked a bit better if they had more depth in certain areas. Maybe that could have been their plan B, not necessarily having a tactical shift, but having more players who can just give them a different dynamic within that same tactical system. They really don't have a lot of options for backups in any position. If you think about center back, if one of Murillo or Milenkovic gets injured, I think Boli may be their next in line in terms of that backup center back role. Could definitely use for a better backup fullbacks, could definitely do for more midfield depth. I'm thinking specifically in terms of a creative midfielder. Definitely need more depth in the wide areas, and we saw it in that Chelsea game and towards the end of last season when Chris Wood isn't getting those goal numbers. They really, really struggle. When Chris Wood isn't overperforming in terms of the goal, like in terms of expected goals, they struggle to, in a system where they don't create a ton of chances, when they really need to be efficient in terms of creating chances on the counterattack. They could definitely use somebody who is a box presence and who's going to be very efficient in terms of just scoring whenever he gets the opportunity, as Chris Wood can do. But as he ages, if he starts to hit poor form, you're really concerned about whether or not they have the depth in attack to get it done. And again, I think they could use another backup winger as well. Next up, we have the final of the newly promoted teams, and that is Sunderland. I think on paper, they are the lowest quality of the promoted teams, and you saw that in the fact that they really, really struggled at the end of the last season in the championship. I want to say it was something like no wins in their final 6 or 7 games in the championship. And they did, like, a lot of their players talked about the fact that the automatic promotion places were pretty much wrapped up. They weren't in line for that. So maybe they started to take their foot off the gas a bit. But even in those playoff games, like every single playoff game, even the ones that they won, they were second best. They were outplayed in all of those games, but got the job done due to some heroics at the end of a lot of those games. So I think overall squad quality could be what you talk about here. They've done really well to address a lot of those areas in the transfer window, but what they still lack, and their biggest problem still, is lack of experience. They've got a ton of really exciting young players. They have a very interesting and intriguing squad in terms of the prospects and the players coming up and potentially improving and maybe becoming, star level players in the future. But they don't really have anybody in the squad currently who is proven in the Premier League. That could be a really big issue for them. And it seems like the signings that they're making, they're playing sort of like the Ipswich game, and I'm trying to think, like the Burnley game, where they sign players who maybe Premier League level, but more so would be willing to stay if they do go down to the Championship, and would give them the best opportunity to go back up if they do get relegated. I think there's no denying the fact that maybe they were promoted a season or two early. So the fact that they're being a little bit more cautious in their transfer approach in signing young players who will almost definitely stay when they do go down, it makes a lot of sense to me. But if you want to give yourself the best chance of staying up in the Premier League, signing some Premier League proven players, particularly in defense and in the striker role, I'm not convinced on any of their strikers really that they can do it at Premier League level. And in terms of defense, I don't know that any of their players are guaranteed to succeed in the Premier League. So those are areas that I would definitely look to improve this transfer window if I was Sunderland. Next up, we have the team on my shirt and the team on the flag in the back here. That is Tottenham Hotspur. There's a lot of areas that you could pick out here. I addressed a lot of this in the previous episode, but to me, the main areas that we need to address in this transfer window are defensive midfield, fullback depth, and a left-footed attacker. I think the squad is a lot better than what we showed, particularly towards the end of last season. Injuries played a big factor, but I think overall we weren't playing to the level that the players in the squad could be playing at. So like I said last episode, I don't think that there's a ton of business that needs to be done for Spurs, but fullback depth is, to me, the biggest of them. Apart from Spence, there are no backup fullbacks in the squad unless you could maybe say somebody like Ben Davies or Archie Gray. They could fill in those roles, but you would prefer to have somebody who is an out-and-out fullback, especially with the way that Thomas Frank sets up with his wingbacks really playing that wide role and pushing up and down the pitch. I don't think Davies or Gray are really suited to that role, whereas Spence certainly is. Getting somebody in that position who is more suited to that sort of tactical identity makes a lot of sense. Defensive midfield is an area that we've needed to address for a very, very long time. I'm talking like almost 5 years now. We've needed to sign somebody as an out-and-out defensive midfielder. So getting somebody who can start in that role, I think, needs to be a priority. I haven't seen any links at this point that definitively say that we're going for that position. So maybe it's not something we'll address. Maybe Frank is looking to utilize a double pivot of Bentancur, Bergvall, Sarr, somebody like that. Or maybe Archie Gray is potentially going to eventually become the starter in that position. It remains to be seen. But to me, getting a defensive midfielder in there is a must. I think it takes Spurs to that next level tactically. And then with Kulusevski out until, I think recent reports are suggesting that he'll be out all the way until November, a left-footed attacker needs to be a very, very big priority. I'm not concerned about the attacking midfield role. I think James Maddison will do just fine in that role. We have a lot of good right-footed attackers, but I think almost all of our wingers are more suited to the left-hand side than they are to the right-hand side. So getting somebody in, like Mohamed Kudus, who is primarily a left-footed attacker, who primarily plays in that sort of right half space, that would, again, take us to that next level tactically, and I think would just push us on, and in terms of creativity and in terms of tactical flexibility, would make a huge difference, and it would allow for somebody like Brennan Johnson to get more chances cutting in on his right foot, and I think Kudus specifically, the way he's able to drop deep and take a man on, beat 2-3 players at a time, one of the single best dribblers in the Premier League. Somebody like that would take a lot of our forwards and wingers to the next level. So it seems like we're really pushing for that signing, and I think that's great. I think that's like the ideal scenario for us, is getting Mohamed Kudus over the line. Next up, we have West Ham, and this is a really interesting situation. There's a lot of areas that I think need to be addressed for West Ham, but similar to Aston Villa, because of some of their finance concerns, I don't think that they're going to be able to do a lot in this window. So the main areas that I think they can improve this window are going to be goalkeeper and attacking depth. Fabianski is now 40 years old. There's no reason to continue having him so ingrained into any of their systems, and there's no reason to have him getting a ton of minutes in this team. I would venture to say that this might be his last season at West Ham and in football in totality. Areola is now 32 years old and had a really, really poor season last year. It looked super low confidence for them, let in a lot of shots that shouldn't have been goals, looked really poor with the ball at his feet. I think it's time to move on from both of them and get somebody who can command the starting goalkeeper role and prioritize somebody who can be the future of that starting goalkeeper role. And I think, like, looking at the midfield, it's very clear that they could use somebody else, specifically somebody who is more of a defensive midfielder. I think Edson Alvarez is a fine player. I think Guido Rodriguez is better than he showed last season. James Ward-Prowse really came on towards the end of last season. It's an area of the pitch that they definitely could improve on, but again, I don't think that they have the finances to make it happen this window. And with the players that are already in place there, I don't think there's much sense in making a big money signing there that might hinder them in signing like a goalkeeper or the next position that we're going to address, which is attacking depth. Even if Kudus does stay, they do not have a ton of attacking depth outside of Bowen, Kudus, and Mikel Antonio. Mikel Antonio is somebody that they've been trying to replace for what feels like the better part of 5 years now. Nicolas Füllkrug didn't do much to endear himself to the West Ham faithful, didn't look like he was up to code in terms of being a Premier League starting number 9. So getting somebody in who is ideally flexible across the forward line, who may be able to replace Kudus if he does depart, somebody like Kudus who can play as a striker, maybe as an attacking midfielder, or as a winger. I like Crescencio Somerville. I think the change in managers and the injury that he got didn't do him any favors. So I think there's still a lot more that could be gotten out of him, but you can't really rely on him with his injury history to be a primary choice in terms of depth. So getting 1 or 2 more players in terms of attacking depth should be a massive priority for them. That's not even addressing the fact that Paquetá may be getting a lifetime ban from English football. So there's certainly some other areas that I would address if I'm West Ham, but with the signings that they've made in defense, with the plethora of players that they already have in midfield, it just makes more sense to go for a goalkeeper and get in some more of that attacking depth as a main priority. And then finally, the last team in the Premier League to address is Wolverhampton Wanderers. Their main priority, there's a lot of them I think that they could go for, but I actually think that there's still a lot of quality in this Wolves team. The biggest thing for me is just going to be replacing Mateus Cunha and replacing Ryan Ait-Nouri. They're rumored to be in for Kyle Walker-Peters, who, if you end up keeping Nelson Semedo, you could maybe make the case that he could start in that left wing-back role, but you'd ideally like somebody who is more like Ait-Nouri, who is primarily left-sided and will look to command that side of the pitch, while one of the inside forwards / attacking midfielders commands sort of that infield role, and somebody that can interchange with him the way that Cunha and Ait-Nouri, that relationship that they had, was very crucial to Wolves staying up and then pushing on towards the back half of last season. So more attacking depth. I really do like the signing of Fer Lopez. I think he's one to watch for the future, but I don't know if you can rely on him to be that out-and-out Cunha replacement. So getting somebody who's maybe more Premier League proven, or just somebody who's a bit more high output than Fer Lopez, should be a priority for them this summer. And I think it would go a long way just to get somebody who is like Cunha, who can just drift across the pitch, and provide a ton of attacking output while he's at it. A really big creative outlet and an occasional source of goals as well should be very important for them. Larsson is incredible. I thought he was super, super impressive. One of the best Premier League strikers outside of sort of the top half, and you could make an argument that he was better than a lot of the strikers in the top half of the Premier League, but they could definitely do for somebody who could be a backup to him. So maybe when you're looking at somebody who is that Cunha replacement, you could potentially be somebody you could potentially be looking at somebody who could fill in either position, whether that be, as a backup attacking midfielder or as a backup striker, or somebody to start and can fill in as a striker when Larsson is out, as injury replacement or as a rotation option. But that is going to do it. I hope you all enjoyed the episode. Again, be sure to leave a like if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe if you're watching on Spotify. Please do leave it 5 stars and follow the podcast. I am Jordan Fox, the host of the American Hotspur, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.